Let me ask you something. Have you ever really thought about why there seems to be a different bank on almost every street corner in America? It's a great question. And the answer, well, it opens up this fascinating story about two totally different ways of thinking about money, about risk, and about what an economy should even be. So get this. Right now, the US has about 4,500 banks. Now take a look at our neighbor, Canada. They have just 79. And no, that is not a typo. 4,500 versus 79. How on earth can two countries that are so similar have financial systems that are so wildly different? To figure this out, we're going to dive into what is really a tale of two banking systems. And it's a story that's all about different histories, different philosophies, and, as you'll see, a really fundamental trade-off between playing it safe and pushing for growth. Okay, so let's start with the US. And here's the first big surprise. While 4,500 sounds like a ton of banks, America's banking industry is actually shrinking, and shrinking at an incredible speed. The whole idea of the small local community bank, it's fading away, and fast. I mean, just look at this trend. It is staggering. 100 years ago, the US had over 30,000 banks. By 1975, that number was chopped in half, down to 14,000. Even back in 2005, there was 7,500. And today, we're at 4,500 and still dropping. This isn't some slow-motion change. It's a massive, decades-long consolidation. So what's driving all this? Well, one of the biggest reasons comes down to this one phrase you've probably heard before: too big to fail. It's the idea that some banks are just so huge and so connected to everything that if they went under, the government would have no choice but to rescue them, to keep the whole economy from collapsing. And that creates this powerful kind of unspoken guarantee for the biggest players in the game. See, that too big to fail status creates this massive incentive for banks to just get bigger and bigger and bigger. Plus, you've got these really high costs from new regulations and technology. A giant like JP Chase can absorb the cost of a new AI department across millions of customers. Your small community bank, not so much. And the result is pretty clear. The four biggest banks are just gobbling up more and more of the market. Okay, now let's hop across the border to Canada, where the picture is completely different. If the US system is like this bustling, sometimes chaotic marketplace, the Canadian system is more like a quiet, stable, well-guarded fortress. And this isn't just some reputation they have. It's been proven. Right in the middle of the 2008 global financial crisis, when banks all over the world were just imploding, the Canadian system was literally named the soundest on the planet. While the US was dealing with a massive housing market collapse, Canada just wasn't. So you might be wondering how many banks have failed in Canada since 2001. The answer: 0. A big, fat 0. A perfect record. Now, what about the US over that same period? 570. Yeah, and this insane contrast is really at the heart of this entire story. So how do they do it? What's the secret? Well, a huge part of the answer is regulation. In the US, you've got this complicated web of at least 3 major federal regulators. In Canada, you have one, just one. Think of it this way. It's like having 3 different specialist doctors arguing about your treatment versus one family doctor who knows your entire history. That unified approach just naturally leads to more cautious standards and a lot more stability. But, and this is a really big but, that stability comes at a price. And this brings us right to the absolute core of our explainer today, this great trade-off between being stable and being innovative. And each country has made a very different choice. This table really lays it all out. US basically says, okay, we'll accept lower stability, but in return, we want more innovation and competition. Canada makes the opposite bet. They prioritize stability, which can mean less competition. But pay close attention to that last row, small business lending. That turns out to be a really crucial piece of this whole puzzle. So the advantage of the American system is its dynamism, its energy. That messy regulatory system actually creates little pockets where new ideas can bubble up. And having all those banks fighting for your business can lead to better prices. But maybe most importantly, those community banks are the absolute lifeblood for small businesses. And small businesses are the single biggest engine of job creation in the United States. Over in Canada, the game is dominated by what they call the Big 6 banks. Together, they hold 93% of all deposits. This concentration creates incredible stability for sure, but critics will tell you it's basically an oligopoly where just a few companies control the whole market. And that can lead to higher fees and less innovation. It's just flat out harder for a small business in Canada to get a loan than it is in the US. So the story seems pretty simple, right? America is all about risk and growth. Canada is all about safety and stability. But just when you think you have it all figured out, the story takes this really fascinating and unexpected twist. That picture of the quiet, conservative Canadian bank, it's not quite the whole story. We know Canadian banks are famous for being safe and conservative. Inside of Canada, their lending rules are strict, their regulation is super tight. But here's the thing. By 2023, a full half, 50%, of everything the Big Six owned and owed was actually outside of Canada. And here is the kicker. About 80% of that foreign business is right here, in the more volatile, less regulated, and more profitable US market. So, in a weird way, Canadian banks achieve their famous stability at home partly by exporting their risk-taking abroad, and mainly to us. And this brings us all the way back to the United States and the huge question it's facing about its own future. With thousands of community banks vanishing, is the US system accidentally losing its biggest advantage without actually gaining the stability of the Canadian model? And this is what's really at stake here. This isn't just some abstract economic debate. When a local bank on Main Street closes its doors, the small businesses it served find it way harder to get a loan from some megabank. And that means fewer jobs and less growth in towns and cities all across the country. So in the end, it's not a simple choice between America's 4,500 banks and Canada's 79. The real challenge is finding the right balance, a system that's stable enough so it doesn't collapse, but also diverse and competitive enough to power new ideas and local growth. And that leaves us with the ultimate question. What is the right number of banks for a healthy economy?